Greetings, I'm John Duvall. Welcome to another edition of the Truth Factor Discussion, a time when we come together to factor the truth of God's Word into our daily lives. We're so grateful that you've chosen to join us today for another time of Bible study. Paul, I see we have some of our regulars in the chat room today, don't we?
We do. I look over there and I see that we have Ken Chapman and Brian Haynes and Josh Thornhill and us and some other folks there. And if you'd like to participate, just go ahead and click on guest and type your name in, and it'll allow you to make comments and ask questions that way as we study along together today.
Appreciate that. We had a couple of little issues this morning, so I'm driving everything today. So if I forget to click on someone, just throw a tomato at me, and I'll try to click on the right speaker. Hey, Tom, tell everybody where we're beginning today, if you would.
Okay, yeah. Today we're beginning at 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and in verse number 4. We're dealing with the subject of love, sometimes what we describe as Christian love. You know, the Greek word agape that we hear so much about today. And in our last study, we dealt with the first 3 verses, which describes how important love is, and now we're going to start dealing with the qualities of love. And of course, that's in a context dealing with spiritual gifts.
That's exactly right. And it's interesting, oftentimes people like to take chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians and print it on a poster and hang it on the wall and different things like that, which I don't have a big issue with. But there is a context for it, and there's a reason for this particular chapter.
Right.
And as you said, that's what we're looking at today. So let's go ahead and pick up our reading there with verse 4. And Paul, if you would read for us. We're going to read through verse 8. I don't quite prefer the division there in verse 8, but we'll go ahead and read beginning with verse 4 and just read to the end of verse 8, if you would.
That sounds great. I'll be reading in 1 Corinthians 13 and looking at verses 4 through 8. The scripture says, "Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away."
All righty. Thank you, Paul. All right. It's interesting that within the context here, that Paul begins this description by saying love suffers long and is kind. Now, when we think about our relationship as Christians and we think about our behavior towards one another, there are times that we will get on one another's nerves. There are times that we will irritate one another. And in the context of 1 Corinthians, they seriously were envying and agitating each other. And I just find it interesting, Tom, that he begins this particular statement by saying love suffers long and is kind. Any thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. As we mentioned a few moments ago, when you put this in the context that you're dealing with, it's chapters 12 through 14 where Paul is discussing spiritual gifts. And it would be kind to say that they had some problems with spiritual gifts. That is with the jealousy that they had toward one another and those types of things. And of course, as Paul concluded chapter 12, in which he described how we are the body of Christ, and he talked about if you have spiritual gifts, which we understand were a part of the first century, the ones that are specifically mentioned there, but he makes the point, if you have spiritual gifts, it's the Holy Spirit that gave it to you, and don't challenge him as to which gift he gave you. He knows what you need, and so when we are jealous and we are tearing each other up as a body, that's a problem. And then he concludes by saying, I show you this more excellent way. And then he makes the imperative. We have to have love. And then you come to verse 4. The love suffers long, which is actually a strengthened form of the idea of patience. And I mean, it's the idea of patience from the standpoint of where there's a, even when you have difficulties. The BDAG, which is one of the dictionaries of the Greek word, gives 3 different definitions for this word. One is to remain tranquil while waiting, and the patience. Second one is to bear up under provocation without complaint. And then he gives as the third one the idea of delay. And so you look at those descriptions there, bear up under provocation and remaining calm or remaining tranquil while you're waiting for something. That's the suffering long, and we need that attitude in everything that we do in dealing with our brethren. And the more challenging they are, the more true that is. And then that leads to kindness. So I'll just stop right there and let you all say something.
All righty. Seth, you got any thoughts about that? Love suffering long and is kind.
Well, not really. I was really enjoying what Tom had to say. I see he's over your shoulder in your picture.
Yeah, I'm trying something a little different behind me.
Yeah.
That's fun.
And I haven't looked this word up yet for comparison, but the Apostle Paul, in his letter to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 4, there in verse 4, he says, let's see, what am I looking for here? Very similar. The Apostle Paul tells the preacher, or tells Timothy, to reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering. And it's very similar, Tom, to what you were explaining about the word suffers long in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 there.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's probably just a different form of it.
Yeah, the Strong's numbering, the one that you were reading is 3114, and the one that Paul uses is 3115.
Yeah.
Just different form there. Yeah. All right. I like the comments. I like what you said on that. Paul, do you have any additions to that?
Well, I preached a sermon that I get remembered here every once in a while, and the title of the sermon was called "On My Last Nerve," and it was mainly about you guys. No, that's not true. But it was about those situations where sometimes we are going to have to truly suffer long. We're going to have to endure when we are having maybe a lack of patience or a lack of endurance. And so as you look here, I think that maybe contrast, I was listening to the definitions that Tom used, maybe contrast there that love's kind, and when others aren't kind, it is long-suffering with them. Right. And so it might be that I just know how people are, like everyone does, and that here there might be a conflict that someone says, well, you're telling me to be nice, but they're not nice. You're telling me to be kind, but they're not kind. And it might be that as you look at that the situation is that even when others are not all that they ought to be, you need to grow and you need to be the long-suffering one.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Seth.
I mean, the whole point of all of this is we're trying to become like God. God is love. God is long-suffering. He is very patient with us. Long-suffering really has a lot to do with forgiveness as well. Being able to say that forgiveness that says, I'm not going to hold this against you. I'm not going to hold this over your head. I'll never bring it up to you or to anyone else ever again. And I may remember exactly what you did to me the rest of my life, but it's not going to affect my relationship with you ever. It's very difficult to command someone to forget something. You can't.
Oh, yeah.
you can't command to forget, but you can command to be patient with people, to be long-suffering, to be forgiving. So forgetting is tough. Forgive and forget, I don't think is possible. But
Right.
forgiveness is. God doesn't look at us and say, there's something about you that really made me mad, but I just can't remember what it was.
Right.
That's not what God does, but he says he remembers our sins no more. It all goes back to his long-suffering, his patience with us, his willing to wait for us to come around. It's all in there connected, and we need to become more like God.
Don't you think that he chooses not to bring those to remembrance? It's not that God's memory fails, but that when he forgives it, he doesn't bring that back like we can do. We may remember, as you said, actually acknowledge that it happened, but that we can choose not to bring it to remembrance, choose not to bring it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that God remembered what Saul or what Paul did in his former life. Holy Spirit inspired him to preserve for us all for all time. God knows what happened in the past, but he's not going to hold it against us ever. He's not going to hang that over our heads.
Right. Yeah, the way I would say that is you remember what happens, but you act as if you don't.
Absolutely. Great way to say it.
Okay. I like that. Good explanations there. Like, I hope I won't remember next week that Tom didn't wear a tie today.
You wouldn't remember that if I hadn't told you.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed.
It slipped
I
my
had not
mind
noticed
when I
until you
started
said
to
something
have
about it.
one. So anyway, so now everybody knows. And since you said that, along with long suffering, he says love is kind. You know, and incidentally, you know, Paul was mentioning something. Those are not opposed to one another or opposites. It's not one or the other. When you are long suffering, you are going to act with kindness towards somebody, even if they are being unkind to you. And one thing that I've learned is, you know, the quickest way to diffuse a situation is with kindness. You know, I mean, there may be exceptions to that, but if you are kind and if you are long suffering, but the kindness has to be there. And the idea of being kind is you're not hateful towards someone. You basically, you know, you treat them with, I guess what you would, I don't know if you use the word complimentary, but you're gentle toward them. You're not doing things that are antagonistic. You're doing good, and you're showing goodwill toward that particular individual. That goes along with being long-suffering. And I can just think of all kinds of situations. You know, we're living in a time now where in the news over the course of the past 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a lot of riots. You know, people have disagreed with police officers, and I know that that's, you know, I'm not wanting to get into a discussion of that per se, but it just got me to thinking about how these police officers are having to exercise great restraint, long suffering, and they have to be kind toward, for lack of a better term, I think it's hooligans. You know, the way that people are conducting themselves, because you've got people that what they're doing is they're trying to instigate. They're trying to antagonize to see if they can cause trouble. We sometimes have, believe it or not, brethren that do that, you know, right or wrong. And so we need to maintain kindness so that we can resolve problems.
All right, I don't want to. I think that's a good point, Tom. I think it's a good illustration you made, and I don't want to belabor these 6 words longer than really what we need to. But something that I hadn't thought about till Tom was talking about this. In the writing here, do you think the Apostle Paul is intending to make a connection between long suffering and being kind? In other words, we suffer long, we use that in the context, we suffer long the behavior of others against us. When people love us and treat us good and treat us well, there's nothing to suffer, okay, to have to endure. But when people mistreat us and brethren treat us wrongly, then there is an endurance that is called upon in order for us to react to them as we are supposed to, which is in a benevolent or kind fashion. I mean, I guess, do you think one connects to the other, or do you think there are two separate, love suffers long, comma, love is kind, comma?
Yeah, actually, I think that they do blend together. I mean, that's a good point. I never thought of them that way. I've always just thought of them as a part of the list. I know when I preach on this subject, I distinguish them. You know, I just put the comma and then I just keep going. I mean, as different qualities. But it is true that they are related to one another. That's not to say that there's not circumstances where you don't need one over the, or when the other, not, I'm not going to say not necessary, right. But you know.
Well, the Bible doesn't tell me to be kind to someone who's being kind to me.
Yeah.
The Bible tells me to be kind to someone who's not being kind to me.
Right, exactly.
Maybe that's why the explanation is here, by the command.
The other descriptions here, or commands that it speaks of, they're not joined, at least in the English language, and of course I'm not an expert in ancient languages, and so I can't say for sure, but the other ones are just commas. It's not rude, it doesn't think its own, seek its own.
Well,
right.
Incidentally, Paul,
that first phrase says, love suffers long and is kind.
Right.
Those seem to be connected as a phrase.
But having said that, though, the "and" is not in the original either. I'm looking at the interlinear here. It's not there.
It's added by the translators for clarity of thought.
Yeah.
Evidently, there was evidence, as they did that. Now, again, I'm not an expert on this, but so I just look at the English, and I do well to speak English.
Yeah, exactly.
But as you look at this, there was a reason why they felt that they didn't, and they did not connect the rest of these, as this was love suffers long and is kind, and love does not envy, and love does not parade itself.
Right.
There seems to be a phraseology there.
Yeah. It does depend on the translations. You're right. The King James Version puts charity suffers long, comma, and is kind, semicolon. Young's literal, though, puts the love is long-suffering, comma, it is kind, comma. But still, even that phrasing would connect the two together. Because then the next phrase begins, the love doth not envy. So even that wording would tend to suggest a connection.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to belabor that too much, but it seems like an interesting point there.
It seems like the next 2 points are very much connected as well. It's all about what's better than one quality or trait is better than another. Love does not envy someone that you think has something that you want, and love does not parade itself, so it doesn't show off what you think you have that's better than someone else's. I mean, you can make connections between the 2 points, between a lot of these. I think they're all connected.
Yeah.
It's all about what love is. It's not characteristics of love. These are definitions of love.
Yeah, qualities
of it. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, let's continue then with this.
Yeah, one other real quick thought on kindness.
Yes.
Kindness is a universal language. That's one of the observations again I made. In addressing this, when I spent about 15 months in Germany in the army way back in the 80s. One of the things that I noted is even though I didn't know a lot of the language, I learned just enough to get around. You could smile at somebody, and if you're kind towards somebody, they're more willing to work with you and help you. It's a universal language that always works, and we can demonstrate it even if we're in a foreign land or in a difficult circumstance.
One more point. Kindness, we're talking about biblical love. Biblical love is always doing what is the best for the other person. Sometimes that does not seem like it's kind to the person you're talking to who's living in sin that you're pointing out in their life. You're really doing what is in their best interest. You're doing the kind thing, but it may not always be interpreted that way. Biblical love means doing the hard thing that needs to be done for salvation of their soul. You do it in the kind way, but just because love is kind doesn't mean you do not speak up. It's doing what is best for their eternal soul, always.
It's a good point. That's a very good point, Seth. Yeah. Okay, so back to verse 4 again. Notice here the next couple of things, and I think in all of our experiences as students of the Bible, and I'm talking about the people in chat room, people who are watching this at a later point. You've heard undoubtedly, hundreds of lessons on this particular subject. Preachers breaking down each individual section. So I guess my point is I don't think we need to break down the sections in a great detail unless there's really something that we might overlook by doing so. But notice he makes the point there that love does not envy. 3 different things in this verse. Love does not envy. The New King James says love does not parade itself, is not puffed up. The envy is pretty straightforward, isn't it? It's the idea of someone having something that you do not, and therefore you're envious towards them. Not the type of, boy, I'd like to have a car like that. It is, my life is unhappy and miserable because I don't have their car.
Yeah, and the idea is to wish ill will on one who has something, or for it to cause you to be, like you said, miserable.
Okay, all right. Seth, do you think that there's a problem with people envying, even today, Christians envying one another? And we're talking about things not even spiritual gifts.
Oh, certainly. I was thinking back to a time when I was in Ellettsville with Paul Adams and everyone hanging out there for the preacher training. And there was another guy in preacher training, one of my good friends, Justin Weldon. We share the same birthday, not the same year, significantly younger than I am. But he, for some reason, he always seemed to be chosen more often during that 2 weeks to lead singing than I did. And I felt like I was perhaps a better song leader than he was at the time. Looking back, I see how dumb it was to be like, hey, I want to lead singing more. Why don't you guys see all the talents that I've got? It's just a simple way that I've seen envy in my own life, and I wanted to, because I was envious, then parade my own abilities to people, and it was completely the wrong motive to sing praises to God. It was to show off my own ability instead of doing what I was supposed to be there for.
Well, if Paul didn't call on you to lead singing enough, take it very personally. Paul knows. So
It wasn't me.
It was.
I thought he was going to be envious, of my, nice-looking ties or something like that. No.
Well, an example came to mind as Seth was talking about that. Let's say you live in an area with several congregations, and when it comes around the gospel meeting season, you try to go to several gospel meetings, and at every gospel meeting there's 4 or 5 preachers, and you get your feelings hurt if you've not been called on to lead a prayer. That's right up there with what Seth was talking about.
Yeah, I've almost reached the point where when they don't call on me, I go.
Well, look, if you want to get called on to lead prayer, you got to be one of the first ones there.
Yeah, you got to be there.
Walk in the door and shake their hand, look them in the face, and they can't help but ask you to lead a prayer.
Exactly.
No.
That's the clue, huh?
Or if you're visiting somewhere and they don't ask you to preach that morning, ask if you don't have a sermon, if you have a sermon ready. I felt that one as well.
Yeah. Here, I'm on vacation. What do you mean you didn't ask me to lead a prayer or to preach the sermon this morning?
Yeah.
What you guys are illustrating, and I've fallen prey to some of those same things before, and what you're illustrating is that this is not one of those things that you go, oh, well, that's some weak person, that's some lowly person. those of us who are supposed to be preachers of the gospel, leaders among God's people in that way, that we struggle with some of those same kind of attitudes, that we have to be careful. And so at Corinth, it may not have been, that fellow who walked in last week and was baptized, and all of a sudden he's envious. It may have been those who, although the congregation wasn't that old, but it may have been those who we'd say should know better.
Yep. Well, could connect this then, Paul, with what you just said there, and what we've been talking about with love does not parade itself, is not puffed up.
Yeah.
If you get your feelings hurt because you're not called upon to do such and such, or like we were using the example of a visiting gospel preacher, if you get your feelings hurt because you weren't asked to lead prayer or you weren't asked to preach the sermon, then maybe it's not so much envy, maybe it's being arrogant about yourself.
Right.
Yeah, and the idea of parading is making a spectacle of yourself. And sometimes, if you're not happy, guess who's going to know it? Everybody's going to know it. And it's possible for us to be that way, is to, and we become so full of ourselves that we think worship's all about us, or it may be an entire. That was really the situation at Corinth, is that here in these use of these spiritual gifts, that it went from being about serving God and about utilizing these spiritual gifts for the edifying of the body, which is what, for instance, as song leaders and preachers and elders and all of that we do, that sometimes we all of a sudden get an idea, hey, it's kind of all about me. And so we parade ourselves, we're puffed up, we're arrogant. And love doesn't behave that way.
And surely having our own live internet broadcast study that puts 4 of us on the camera doesn't relate to that in any, there's no motive behind that whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. None of us are ever guilty of parading ourselves.
Would you put me back on the camera for a few minutes?
Okay, there you go. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about our little exchange just prior to the lesson here, but anyways, one of the things that comes to my mind when I think of this is looking at a distinction. There are some people that they are absolutely innocent as they show you something that they have. That they're happy to have something. They're wanting to share with you. Mm-hmm. There are others that are, look at what I have.
Right.
And they're bragging and all those types of things. You have the two different dispositions. Either one of those could cause somebody to envy, and in one circumstance you're completely innocent, you don't mean anything, and it's not wrong. I'm saying it's not wrong because we're told to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, so that's the attitude that we need to have toward one another. But now here you've got somebody that they have got, and let's use as an illustration spiritual gifts, such as speaking in tongues. I can speak in tongues and you can't. And so you've got the one that is got the gift that's bragging about it, mm-hmm. and you've got the one that doesn't have the gift that is envying because of it. And when you put those two together, that's a lethal cocktail, or whatever you want to describe there.
I like that point. And what came to mind when you were talking would be a modern day example. Let's say you've got a family member, not a family member, a member of the congregation, that maybe the father's lost his job and they're struggling. The kids have to wear hand-me-downs. They don't live in a large house at all, and they've been having to eat ramen every week because they ran out of money. And on Sunday morning, they walk in dressed up in the best that they could do, which is somewhat ratty or dirty. And you walk up in your brand new suit and your gold watch on. You say, "Hey, what do you think about my brand new suit I bought this week?" Or, "Look at my nice watch I got this week." It's exactly what you're talking about, where we do this. Let me tell you how great I have been this week and how wonderful I have things, not stopping to think the envy that it might prompt within them, or at least making them feel worse because of their status, depending on the situation.
Yep.
Good point, Tom. Yeah. Brian makes a really good point, Paul, in the chat room, in regards to the best attitude really that we should have.
Yeah, I was reading that. He says, I was visiting with another local preacher about working with someone but not getting the credit. He made the great point to me of the idea of being a football team. We all get the glory of the win, 1 Corinthians 3:6. And if memory serves, that's about Apollos watering and Paul planting and God giving the increase. You know, I was thinking about what we're talking about today, and it's the point that I've observed before when Jesus talked about letting your light shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
He says, let your light shine. He never says shine your light. And so I think this idea of parading itself, behaving rudely, that it's kind of the shining your light, going out and putting the spotlight on yourself.
That's a very good point. Very good illustration. And for what it's worth, Brian, we want to acknowledge your part in this endeavor by being in the chat room.
Yes, and we thank you, yeah.
We thank you.
And for the rest of you, don't be envious, join in.
That's right. But the point's right on the money, though.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pick on preachers a little bit more. The thing about preaching is that it can foster and feed an arrogant attitude. You stop and think about it. Every Sunday, I get to stand up in front of everybody. The larger congregation, the better. And everybody has to look at me, and everybody has to watch me and listen to what I have to say. They need to pat me on the back when I've done, because, hey, I've just preached a sermon that was better than I've ever preached. They better acknowledge it. I can see egos being squashed if you don't tell a preacher that he's done a good job. And the sheer fact of preaching can lend to that personality if we're not careful. You know, because we are the center of attention in a manner of speaking when we are preaching the sermon. And it's perfect for feeding an arrogant, egotistical, narcissistic attitude. And we have to be careful of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, I'm sure you struggle with that. Too bad, you know, it's just you.
Hey, look, you know, I've even taken a dive in the pulpit, so that gets rid of all arrogant and egotistical attitude right there when you fall flat in front of everybody. So
you just did that so that everybody would watch that video on YouTube. And
yeah. I was gonna say, especially when you prayed the video about once every 2 months.
Yeah, my wife does that.
Exactly.
Anyway, okay.
Keeping you humble, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I think the point
about rejoicing in someone's suffering here in just a moment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the points we're making are good points. When I look in the chat, and I don't know who watched this later, look in the chat. You know, I see a whole group of preachers. And there may be others watching that aren't signed in, but to help us remember that as we preach to others, that we need to make sure that we're preaching to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
the best lessons are the ones that apply to me.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I'm not saying that bragging. That's just the truth. If it's something that applies to me, sometimes I have a tendency to get a little more passionate about it.
Well, if all of our lessons are designed to be preached at another person, then really, how do we benefit from it as preachers?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if we step on anyone's toes, it should be our own toes that we step on first before we ever present the sermon. I mean, it's just from our lives that a lot of the ideas for sermons come just because we need it ourselves. I mean, well, let's continue on. And again, if you're watching in the chat, if you're watching, we'd love for you to participate in our study. Look at verse 5 there, and talking about love, and this does all work together. I mean, it's kind of like multi parts of a Lego project that you've built. It says, love does not behave rudely. Love does not seek its own. Love is not provoked. Love thinks no evil. In our behavior towards one another, we do not behave in a fashion that would hinder, hurt, or discourage another. We are not selfish in our behavior towards others. And we don't allow ourselves to be as we would say today, we don't allow other people to get our goats. Love keeps everything in check. Our attitude, our reactions, and as well as our actions. Kind of said those backwards there. Now, any thoughts about those three before we talk about thinks no evil?
Yeah. That behaving rudely goes back to what I talked about a few moments ago with the kindness.
Yes.
It's the absolute. We've got a problem with that in our society today. I don't know if it's always been that way, but people are just. It comes back to the selfishness, which is what talk about seeking your own. People think about themselves, and there's just a lot of rudeness in our society. It's perpetrated in our media. It's treated as a joke in our media, as a matter of fact. Most sitcoms, not all of them, but many of them have rude characters, and they're the ones that get the laugh lines. Because of that. So it's a concern.
Good point.
One thing that's really hard to achieve, to overcome, is to not be irritable. Someone who is easily irritated in the ESV, or easily provoked in New King James. It's very, very difficult to let things slide, let things go.
Yep.
It takes a lot of practice. I got my practice at that by being a baseball umpire, Little League. That thickens your skin and just lets you, when you realize and when you set your mind on things above and not on things of this earth, so many things that you could be offended at, you realize they really don't matter, and you let them go. Don't let things easily provoke you. Ways that people might offend you.
I'm glad you brought that up. I looked over at the ESV after you said that, and I like the way they kind of break this down. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful.
Right.
To me, that kind of drives home the maybe the thought a little bit stronger. Paul, would you want to say something?
No.
Okay. All right.
No, I'm good.
Yeah. The New King James uses that last expression, "thinks no evil."
Yes.
That's kind of interesting. I have a footnote on that on this again, New King James. It says keeps no account of evil. So you've got somebody that's remembering things.
Yeah.
And that type of a circumstance there, assuming the worst.
The English Standard Version, you will have a footnote for the Greek, irritable and does not count up wrongdoing.
New American Standard says does not take into account a wrong suffered.
Yeah.
Things go.
So, that really does make you look at the phrase thinks no evil a little bit differently, because oftentimes we want to separate that and say, okay, I can't think evil of a brother. And there's some truth to that. But contextually, you don't think evil of the brother because he's done you wrong. It connects it with the wrongdoing and the proper reaction on your part.
An improper way of this is when you feel guilty for being tempted, for having evil thoughts in your head of being tempted to sin, that you feel like you feel guilty for being tempted. Jesus was tempted.
Sure.
So it's one. You don't need to take thinks no evil and misapply it to say, hey, when I'm tempted, I need to ask forgiveness. Temptation is not sin. There are ways that you can grow your faith, grow your shield to where you're tempted less often, but temptation itself is not a sin.
It's a good point. It's like reading James chapter 1. You can stop the process.
Certainly.
Right.
Okay, with that being said then, let's now look at verse 6 there. Still talking about love. does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. All right, are we looking at iniquity being sin, rejoicing being reveling in that sin, therefore enjoying to do what they're doing and being unwilling to change, but instead love rejoices in the truth. How would y'all relate this statement in verse 6, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, with the overall context of the qualities of love in relation to the proper functionings of a local congregation?
I thought of it in two different ways, John. One way I thought of is that sometimes when we see someone who appears to, or maybe is thought of as being very pious, very, very righteous, highly respected, and then something happens in their life, and we go, and there is a sin that becomes known. Sometimes people can go, aha, I knew that. I knew they weren't as good as they appeared. The other thing is, another way of looking at this might be that sometimes we kind of wink at our own faults. In other words, maybe if John and I are having an argument, and I really just slice him and dice him and treat him in an unkind and unloving way with my words, I might tell someone, you know, I really let John have it today, and when that was the wrong thing to do. I'm glorying in that. I think that could maybe go either way.
Okay.
I remember an article that I wrote when I was in Ellisville at the preacher training program there, talking about having this type of attitude. Say someone comes and knocks on your door, you're having a religious discussion with a coworker, and you present the truth, but they go away piping mad at you. How do you feel afterward? Do you feel, hey, I defended the truth and I'll never see that guy again? Aha, I won.
I won. Yeah.
There are no winners when the truth may be presented and the truth is rejected. There's not a win and a lose. There's just should be sadness that an agreement, the understanding of the truth wasn't reached.
Yeah.
But I bet that article is better than any one that Bradley wrote. The fellow you talked about earlier.
Oh,
the better song leader. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was a great article.
Well, let me.
I looked at it recently and it was terrible. it needs rewriting.
Well, you know, self-deprecation leads to people patting you on the back, so you know you could still be guilty of something here. No, Seth, it was a good article. No, don't be so hard on yourself. The two things. The English Standard Version, just for comparison, says it does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth.
New American Standard does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth.
Those readings tend to fit the context here of our reaction to, wrongdoing. But now, with what you were talking about, I could not help but thinking about debates within or among brethren, preachers within the brotherhood. And this is not typical of every debate because I've not been to every debate, but I have heard from and talked to some preachers who have debated, and I have seen that there tends to be the attitude of, I don't want to call the supporters cheerleaders, but it's like, yeah, you really showed them, boy, you skunked them, you beat them, I mean, you just tore them up. And right. I understand in principle regarding the intellectual argument, you think that their argument was so much stronger than the other, and they walked away with their mouth dropped down to the floor because they had no response for you. But to talk about the presentation of the truth in such a combative term, I don't know. There is an interesting debate coming up, it may be this weekend, Brian Garlock has been announcing on his Facebook, and it's an interesting debate over. Help me out with this. It's the idea of the penal substitution. In other words, one side holds the idea that Jesus became sin, and therefore God had to turn his back on Jesus, and the other is that Jesus was the sacrifice for sin, that he didn't take on the guilt of our sin, but he was the sacrifice for that sin.
That's not the exact wording of it.
It's not, no. Let me bring it up. I would have liked to have gone to kind of handled their live stream for them.
It's in Huntsville, Alabama. Coming up soon.
Page, do a screen share.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not so much trying to advertise the debate, but my point is at any time that there's a debate like that, let's make certain that we don't treat it as combatants, but we're studying the truth, presenting two different arguments, and watch. Let's don't get too caught up in the competitiveness of it.
Right. Yeah. 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 When you study the history of debating, whether it be among brethren or whether it be between brethren versus, say, somebody in a denomination,
sure,
or another religion, atheist, whatever it is, we've seen debates where both disputants treated each other with respect, and they didn't toss insults at each other. And we've seen others where they have total respect for each other and they make the debate about the issue as opposed to about themselves and about winning versus the other one.
Right.
And so you've got the difference. And it comes back down to an attitude, which is every one of these qualities that you find associated with the love here. It's about a proper attitude toward one another.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
It's trying to bring it up.
I've got one here. I'll go and bring it up and just do the screen share of it. Let me increase the font size here. Oh, wrong page. Hang on.
Yeah, I think Josh is asking for the link to the video anyway. So.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
If you go to Facebook and search for Donahue Myhan, is D. You can read it up here. I don't know if you can. DONAHUEMYHAN, and I'll drop that into the chat here in just a moment. Here are the two propositions, and I'll tell you what. Let's the first one on the first night. Pat Donahue will affirm, and Bob Myhan will deny. The Bible teaches that in his death, Jesus took our sins upon himself as our substitute. That's a teaching I've heard all my life. Okay. On the second night, Bob Myhan will affirm, and Pat Donahue will deny. The Bible teaches that Jesus of Nazareth, while on the cross, was not forsaken by his heavenly Father. That's the position that I have found myself in the last couple of years supporting, the more that I've studied this subject. Now, my point is, ultimately, the reason I brought the idea of this debate up here is it's just encouraging people to be of the proper mindset towards one another very clearly. But with that being said, it would be a very interesting debate to view. And I'll drop the Facebook link, and Tom's already done the same thing. Okay. No, Josh, you put in there my fall.
The public fall of John, yes.
Yeah. Paul, what are you sharing there? Let me click over there.
That's the announcement.
That's the announcement. Okay.
Yeah, the 11th. And I assume that's coming up next year, then, right?
No,
that's
already happened.
Soon. That's pretty soon.
Yeah.
Let me jump over here and share the chat room real quick one more time, just for those who are watching the video can see the information on it.
BibleDebates.info is Donahue's website, and he has the flyer, and we'll have the audio posted on his website.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good.
Okay.
Very good.
BibleDebates.info.
Y'all have to follow that too. So.
It would be. I would love to hear the debate, to actually see the argumentation from both sides.
It's kind of interesting because I agree with both positions. I don't see them as contradictory, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't, there's not enough evidence yet that I've seen to say that one side is absolutely wrong and the other side, I mean, I don't know if we have enough biblical data to properly answer the question completely. But I've heard all my life, Jesus, when he hung up on the cross of Calvary, God turned his back on him, and that's why he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And God can't be around sin, therefore Jesus became sin for us, so God turned his back on Jesus, and for a moment Jesus was separated from God. But yet when you read Psalms 22, though, the passage that Jesus quoted, it's a psalm of victory, not a psalm of being forsaken. It's
there's about 10 different things in Psalm 22 that point to that very day. And Jesus isn't going to give a 30-minute speech or an hour-long speech when he can't breathe. He just quotes the first verse and expects us to know exactly what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
As you think about that debate, you might assume that some good brothers will suffer long. They'll be kind. They'll not behave rudely. They'll not think evil or rejoice in iniquity.
Great way of bringing us back to topic, Paul. Absolutely. Let me stop this here real quick. 1-800 service. Okay. So let's go ahead and close this up with this particular verse here, verse 7, where he says there that love bears all things. Let me bring this up on screen share. This phone will quit ringing. You know what? I can make it quit ringing now. There we go. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Would you say this is just a general overview, not a general overview, but a general way of explaining how love benefits and affects our behaviors towards one another?
Yeah, I see it as a summary of the points that we've talked about.
Okay.
I mean, and at the same time, I see it as a summary, but let's see. I was going to say maybe there's a little bit of a progression associated with it too. Maybe not, but.
Well, do we want to spend time next week talking about verse 7? Kind of spend the time breaking it down.
Well, it is 10 o'clock if we want to stop now. So we did start a few minutes late, so it's up to us. Whatever we want or whatever you want to do. I should say up to you.
Pardon me. What do y'all
John,
think? Y'all
I think we have to be careful of that passage. It's not to try to make it say more than it says.
Yeah.
Right.
But what are the all things and that we believe and bear and hope and endure? But I think he is talking about the same kind of patience and looking for the best in others, and something that was sorely lacking at Corinth. But we can start out in a brief discussion of that verse next time.
Okay.
Yeah. I see the idea of giving the benefit of the doubt there in verse second phrase. The third phrase is going back to the rejoicing in truth. You want the best outcome. The best outcome where God is concerned, where everybody else is concerned. So yeah, we could talk a little bit about it.
All right, let's plan to do that then. Let's plan next Wednesday to pick up there with verse 7, and kind of, we don't need to break it down more than what is there, but keep it within the context of this. Yeah. Something I hadn't thought about is we have kind of the perfect forum for a moderated internet debate. I mean, from the standpoint, it wouldn't take much for two people on their own home computers or office computers joining a hangout of 3, the moderator and each debater, and you managing the debate like that. Here's your 15 minutes, now here's your rebuttal, and it being streamed live in this capacity.
And the moderator could actually cut them off at their time they're supposed to be quiet.
That's true. It'd be easy enough to do, yeah.
And keep them from interjecting in the middle of the other person's speech.
Are you talking about me?
I had not given this any thought, but that's
talking about you.
Yeah. Um,
Well, I think we should find something that we divide over just so we can do that.
there you go.
Let's sow discourse among us.
Yeah, I got the perfect topic. I'll give it to you when we get done here. So.
Yeah, we want to be known as factoring the truth into our daily lives, not factoring the brotherhood.
Yeah.
Or fracturing the brotherhood, I guess. But no, it is an interesting thought, and there are some subjects that I think warrant. And here's the thing, they don't. I'm not saying they warrant a debate. They warrant a good, solid Bible discussion. You know, let's lay the facts out there. Let's establish everything. Let's show what the Bible teaches, and then let people make the decisions for themselves and take fair turn and equal turns and everything. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us today. Let's go ahead and start the closing here. Tom, we'll throw it to you. Tell everybody how they can get in contact with you if you'd like.
Okay, absolutely. And again, once again, I'm honored to be a part of this study here. You can contact me or any one of us by our name at truthfactor.com. So I'm Tom at truthfactor.com, and so on and so forth. All of us are available. We have separate email address, or you can contact all of us, you know, with a straightforward email, and that's what was the address there, John, on that?
Send it to questions.
Question.
QUESTIONS at truthfactor.com. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So you can get hold of all of us that way. Thank you, everybody, for listening in on us. Our comments were quiet today.
Yeah.
But we know you're still listening and so on, and we hope that this is a good discussion and beneficial, and look forward to continuing it next week.
Most definitely, most definitely. Seth, any final thoughts or comments?
Well, please feel free to contact us if you're seeing this at a later time and you disagree with anything that we've said today. Please, before you talk to everyone else about it, talk to us and send us an email. Emails are provided on the screen. Look us up on Facebook. Look up where we preach and give us phone calls. Whatever you want to do, contact us and talk to us about it. And we greatly appreciate it. We just want to try to find the truth as well as hopefully you do.
Absolutely. And Paul, let's end with you. Any other final thoughts or comments?
Thanks for joining us today, and if you're ever in South Central Indiana, stop by and see us here at Ellettsville. We'd love to have you visit, and love to get to meet some of the folks who may listen in from other parts of the country.
Absolutely.
They are quite friendly there, I know from experience.
They are. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this another time period of factoring the truth of God's Word into our daily lives. We hope you can join us again next Wednesday, which should be December the 17th, at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time.
That's noon Eastern Time.
That's 9 o'clock Pacific Time.
Or if you're in Israel, the scriptural time to meet on Wednesdays, 7 p.m.
All righty. Right here at live.truthfactor.com. Have a wonderful week.